Father Robert Kisala, fondly known as Bob, is from United States, and he was ordained in 1985. Then he was assigned to Japan province. So he did his studies in sociology of religion in Japan, and he worked as a professor as well as a research scholar in Nanzan University, Japan, from 1995 to 2004. He was also a formator, thus rendering his service in Formation House from 1999 to 2004. He was elected as a provincial superior in 2004. Then during the 2006 chapter, he was elected as the General Councillor Diaconical. In 2012, the last general chapter, he was elected as the Vice Superior General. So he is known for his scholarly work, intellectual contribution, and in-depth administration. He has got a vast knowledge regarding interculturality, especially after doing a lot of visitations in many countries. Well, we are very happy to have you here with us, and we welcome you warmly. Now over to you.
As proposed by Bennett, with the 6 different stages. Bennett proposes that in the first 3 stages, we're still in the realm of ethnocentrism, that we're still judging other cultures from our own cultural viewpoint. And it's only in those final 3 stages that we come to ethno-relativism, that we're able to view from several different cultural points of view. Whereas Hammer, in developing it and in putting the last 2 stages together, merging the last 2, he indicates that the movement from ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism actually happens right in the middle of minimization. Somewhere around here is when we move to the ethno-relative point of view. One's own culture is experienced as just one of a number of equally complex worldviews. So there are very real differences between cultures. Our culture is one way of looking at the world, but there are equally valid different ways, and significantly different ways of looking at the world and reacting to the world. And this is important. It does not mean that we agree with everything in another culture. Cultural difference may be judged negatively, and this is where judgment comes in. May be judged negatively. But the important point is that the judgment is not ethnocentrically based. Our judgment of other cultures is not based on our own culture, but on some other objective criteria that we have become more aware of. So it's not a matter of accepting everything in another culture. We realize that cultures are very different. That's what we accept. We accept the fact that cultures are very different, that all cultures, at a certain level, are an equally valid way of viewing the world. But then we also recognize that there are elements of every culture that need to be criticized, that can be judged. It struck me in preparing a homily for the seminarians at the philosophy in Bhopal the other day. When I was thinking in terms of the attitudes of dialogue, of solidarity, respect, and love, in terms of our intercultural competence, it struck me then that perhaps we can say that it's only when we have learned to love another culture that we're able to make this judgment about elements in the culture. That it's only when we have learned to love another culture that we have gone through the experience, the pain of growing in awareness of a different culture, that we have come to love that culture and the people of that culture, and then we can point out what might be in need of God's healing within that culture. It was an idea that I had the other day. The point being that the fact that we become good at adapting to other cultures and understanding other cultures and accepting cultural difference does not mean that we accept all cultures just as they are. Okay? But there is an element of judgment that needs to be made. Then the task in moving into the next stage would be to refine our analysis of cultural contrast, to become more adept at seeing these cultural differences and analyzing the differences and what they mean and how we can then react to the cultural differences. And that's when we move into the stage of adaptation. When we become good at not only knowing the culture, but at acting in culturally appropriate ways. We're able to look at the world through different eyes, able to a certain extent to take the position of the person in the other culture, that we know the other culture well enough at this point that we're able to see the world through the eyes of a person in that culture, and able to intentionally change our own behavior in order to communicate more effectively in another culture. Not only do we understand the culture, but we're able to act as people do in that culture. And not only in trivial ways, but also in terms of our deep understanding of that culture. I mentioned that in Hammer's view, this one and the final stage of integration are one. When I have been presenting this to, especially the groups at NAMI, I always had trouble trying to describe the difference between adaptation and integration, perhaps because, as Hammer points out, they are essentially the same. The way I described it for the groups at NAMI would be in terms of language learning. We've had the experience, I think, in learning a language where we come to the stage where we can think of what we want to say in our own language, and then we're able to translate it into the new language and to express that. That's an intentional translation, an intentional movement into another language culture. And then there comes another stage, a further stage, when we no longer have to think about it, when we're not thinking in our own language anymore, but many times the words just come out naturally. The words that we want to express don't have to go through our own language first, but just sort of come out in the new language. And perhaps, at least in Bennett's original view, that was the distinction that he made between adaptation and integration. Whereas at the stage of adaptation, we are making the conscious effort and the conscious decision to act in appropriate, or culturally appropriate ways. Whereas in integration, we just naturally do it. I mean, we've been in the culture so long that when this situation comes up, we just begin to act naturally in this way. It's a trivial example, but as a joke, I say that I realized that I had been in Japan for too long when one day when I was on the phone, when I was talking on the phone, I realized that I was bowing while talking on the phone. Because it's just natural to bow when you use certain words in Japanese. So perhaps that would be the integration stage in the original Bennett model.